folks, my name is Rob. Welcome back to another F1 fantasy video. Today we're looking at my preview and final thoughts for race week 15 ahead of the Italian Grand Prix this coming weekend at Monza. As always, if you're new around here and you're enjoying the content, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Really making a lot of progress with the content here, and particularly for this installment. Wasn't expecting to carve this one out ahead of Monza, but very grateful I've managed to make a little bit of time on my Thursday night. This will come out Friday morning, so just wanted to digest a few of the key talking points and revisit my team selection ahead of this race week. So first things first, we'll take a look at chip usage. I don't think there's any reason to activate any chips at Monza. There isn't really a risk of bad weather. It looks like the forecast is clearing for Sunday, so hopefully we have an uninterrupted day of racing. There isn't really a need, given it's not a sprint race weekend, to activate the 3 times DRS, the limitless or the autopilot, and unless there's a random surprise in qualifying where, say, a budget driver shoots up the rankings and comes out somewhere around the top 5, there probably isn't a need for final fix. So in a nutshell, it doesn't really give me much of an inclination to go in the direction of chips, but with 8 races after this one left on the calendar, I think, and with many people still to use most of the chips in their pocket, I think we'll see over the next few weeks a real kind of swing in ranks and points as people start to activate those heavy hitting ones. So anyway, stay tuned for that, but I think as of right now, nothing for Monza. As far as key talking points ahead of the weekend, usually this is kind of a question section, but I think given there's a lot of things to digest and dissect, going to try and make this more around key themes and narratives heading into the weekend, and this will probably reappear in future videos as well. First things first, Fernando Alonso's resurgence at Zandvoort. Obviously a really nice surprise to see him back on the podium. Had a bit of, I guess, time away from the top 3, and certainly in terms of fantasy wasn't really an asset that many people lately had been invested in. But from what we saw in practice in the lead up to Zandvoort, those Aston Martin upgrades really looked good. He was the second fastest driver at the Dutch Grand Prix over the course of the weekend, according to Formula Data Analysis. So I think that's really encouraging ahead of the visit to Monza, where speed is of the essence. So I think Fernando is in the box seat for many people to feature in their teams. I certainly haven't got a desire to part ways with him at the moment. Obviously, as always, with practice on the horizon on Friday, be sure to keep an eye on that. But for now, obviously an encouraging sign that the man in green is back in form, and hopefully a few more points hauls like we saw the weekend just gone. Another storyline to come out of Zandvoort was Alpine. They had a few really disappointing performances, back-to-back DNFs in the lead up to the Belgian Grand Prix, and then obviously they turned things around there and in Zandvoort. Gasly obviously with the podium last weekend, a really good sign for him, his best performance of the season, and obviously certainly his best fantasy performance of the season too. So a really good sign for him. I was pretty encouraged by the drive. It wasn't by any means the fastest drive, but certainly a drive that was comprised of really good strategy and just kind of held his nerve throughout the weather, and certainly given there were a lot of different strategies last weekend, it's a really good sign for a driver with experience like him to capitalize. He had a number of overtakes, a number of positions gained, and obviously came away with that 3rd place. So certainly on the radar for a lot of people heading into this weekend, and if Alpine can improve on their speed, then I certainly think he's a viable option heading into this coming weekend. I guess another theme for me was and heading into this weekend more specifically, are the budget drivers. Now, I think a situation I'm faced with is, if I proceed with one of the team builds that I'm looking at the moment, which we'll go into in a moment, is whether to go with a proven, experienced, and I guess consistent fantasy driver like Guan Yu Zhou or Yuki Tsunoda over someone like Logan Sargent. Now, they're very different assets to own, and I think both come, or all of them come, with some degree of risk depending on how you want to approach this weekend. Zhou and Tsunoda, king of the overtakes, they're both kind of leading that category throughout this season, and I think it's a really good sign that someone like Zhou, despite his DNF on the weekend, can more often than not just put forward those consistent performances on Sunday. He has 5.5 overtakes per race this season, Tsunoda 5.5 as well. So a great sign for both of them to own, and I think you just know what you're getting from them. So obviously a safe bet, probably a little bit less risk than someone like Logan Sargent. And obviously he's coming off the back of a DNF last weekend as well. But I think something to think about, if it's not already one of the major storylines heading into Monza, is that Williams straight line speed. Now, Alex Albon, who I'll touch on shortly, and has kind of stolen away a few headlines recently with his performances in that Williams, is that their straight line speed is exceptional. At so many races this season, they have been the fastest car on track, even outstripping the Red Bull. I don't know necessarily if they'll be able to match the Red Bull because of that exceptional DRS that the Red Bull has, but I don't think they'll be outside the top 2 or 3 teams with that top speed. So Albon's obviously top of my shopping list this weekend, but Logan Sargent, going back to the budget driver kind of discussion, is if he's able to kind of get close to matching Albon's pace in that Williams, then he's certainly a high upside play. He's one of the lowest owned assets in the game too, and he's obviously driven quite well lately, despite obviously his DNF, and does, as I say, come with some degree of risk. He still hasn't broken even this season. He's only had 2 double-digit points performances and 3 DNFs. So obviously the signs aren't that great, but if he is able to finish the race, I definitely think he's in with a decent shot at points. So keep an eye on Logan Sargent's times in practice. So it really just comes down to whether or not you want to go with someone that's low risk like Joe Sonoda, or you want to take a punt on a low owned asset like Logan Sargent. So for me, again, it's a wait and see, but I'm very much interested to see how practice shakes out. But I think naturally, as with just about any circuit, is how cars are expected to perform and how the design is going to kind of set up for the weekend. There's a lot of teams that have run pretty loaded wings, McLaren obviously being a notable one, that do quite well on circuits with a few more turns, some of those slower speed corners, but obviously Monza not really affording many of those at all. So I do expect the McLarens may struggle a little bit in parts. But a team like Williams, teams like Red Bull, they don't typically run very loaded wings. They're known for being very fast on the straight. So I think they're certainly going to be teams to watch. And obviously I think teams that will probably dominate, or wouldn't be surprised if they do dominate. So I think that's just something to keep in mind there. But really interesting was that last weekend as well, Red Bull, they did run one of the largest loaded wings among all cars and still ran one of the fastest times at Zandvoort. So I certainly think they're going to be a few steps ahead of the rest of the competition. McLaren and Mercedes, as I mentioned McLaren before, were some of the more draggy teams. So I really want to see what McLaren can do with the car design in the lead up to practice, whether or not the times look encouraging enough to go with 1 or 2 assets, or none at all in some cases, because there were a lot of people that were running triple McLaren in Zandvoort. So whether or not that's viable at Monza is another thing altogether. But I do want to take a look at how my team's looking this weekend. This was who I ran in my team selection video for Zandvoort. Pretty solid across the board. Obviously, Joe DNF, the only blemish. But as I mentioned, I think McLaren may struggle a little bit. I'm not really sure what to expect from them, and I'm inclined to go with max 1. I'd be very surprised if I go with 2 McLaren assets. I think, as I mentioned, team selection video will be at the end of this video if you haven't already seen it, so check it out. The logical move for me would be to go for someone like Alex Albon in favor of Oscar Piastri. Now that leaves me with 1.1. There's very little I can do with that budget, and it also gives me the flexibility to roll the spare transfer into next week, or into the next race, at Singapore. I think with a street circuit coming up, the likelihood of me potentially using the no negative chip there, I would like to have that flexibility of having 3 trades up my sleeve. But again, like I said, Joe, whether or not I want to take a punt on someone like him, not necessarily a punt, but take a punt on someone like Logan Sargent, if I can get my drivers right. Someone like him in that budget slot could be, as I said, at 8% outside of Liam Lawson, the lowest owned asset in the game. Plug him in that Williams. If it looks really good in practice, that could be a real differential lineup there. The other approach I could do, and it's not something I have given a lot of thought about because of the form that Fernando's recently shown in Zandvoort, but if you do want to have more of a balanced team, move away from that budget driver kind of roulette, as some of us like to call it, you could pull him out. I've obviously got Oscar already in the team, so it would involve bringing in Alex Albon, and then someone like, say, Pierre Gasly, for instance, in that other position here. So that avoids the budget driver roulette, that headache that plagues us just about every week for those of you that run it too. Gives you three pretty consistent, solid drivers that have all had a really good run of form lately. The only, I guess, issue there is you're doubling up on McLaren, and as I said, not quite sure yet what that's going to look like at Monza for them. But I do like Pierre Gasly, as I said, drove a really good race in Zandvoort. You've got Alex Albon, that Williams looks excellent on the straight. And look, if McLaren do look promising in practice, then I think they're certainly a viable team to go for. I'm by no means writing them off, but at the same time, you know, you are foregoing someone like Fernando Alonso, who, as I said, is in an Aston Martin that has looked like the second fastest car lately. Their upgrades are really looking promising, and I certainly think he's going to be able to replicate that form heading into Monza. So a few different dilemmas. I'm not really, and I know Ferrari at their home race has been talked about a little bit, but just that price point, not really enough for me to consider going in that direction. So a few things to think about this weekend, but I think if it's not this team, it will be the Joe and Alonso team. That's where I'm at right now. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. I have a very brief one, but I just wanted to get something down, and if you enjoy it, please do like it. One other thing to note is, as you can see here on the screen, I've joined up with FanAmp. On Twitter, we do race week preview every single week on their YouTube channel. But I think the most exciting part coming up is that we are going to do a deadline stream 1 hour before qualifying on Saturday. So Saturday morning in the US for me, Saturday afternoon for viewers in Europe. So do tune into that. It's going to be really exciting. I'm partnering up with F1 Fantasy HQ, Adam, a good friend of mine. So drop in. We'll answer all of your questions live on stream. We'll be tackling our own team selection dilemmas, and we can certainly do our best to help you with that too. So appreciate you guys dropping by. Good luck with your teams this weekend, and I'll see you all very soon.